Okay, that's the groups. Let's get back to the message here. Why would I suggest that the death of Osama Bin Laden is somehow going to re-legitimize the Afghan Taliban? Why is his death going to make the Afghan Taliban a player again in any future stabilized Afghanistan and a future Afghani government? Well, I got 5 reasons why that the Afghan Taliban is going to be re-legitimized. Starting with number 1, the most obvious, they're winning. That's terrible to say. It's not a laughing matter because that's U.S. and NATO forces over there on the ground fighting this fight against this group of folks in Afghanistan. But we need to be honest. You got to say, you know the Plaid Avenger, I tell things the way they are, not the way we want them to be. And the Afghan Taliban has been winning. Right now, in 2011, you got over 100,000 U.S. troops in Afghanistan, perhaps another 10, 20, or 30,000 NATO European allied troops there, and they're still not winning. And the Taliban ranks have actually been swelling in the last 5 years. More and more people are joining this fight on the side of the Taliban. People are disgruntled across Afghanistan, and there's more and more of a feeling of support the damn Taliban, get U.S. and NATO out, because even though our government and the country sucked under the Afghan Taliban, at least it was stable and it wasn't a war zone. It's important to note. The Afghan Taliban controls large swaths of Afghanistan, and with the new year of fighting just now kicking off, they really don't get into action and start fighting until late spring and early summer, and that's now. It's likely that you're going to see a lot more death and destruction in Afghanistan and a lot more territory being claimed by the Afghan Taliban. So they're kind of winning. And unless the United States and NATO can figure out a way to kill every single male in the Central Asian region, including all of Afghanistan, this fight will go on forever. Because remember what their goal is. The Afghan Taliban wants their country back. This is their country. I'm not suggesting that they're in the right by this, but this is their home. I should put it that way. They're not going anywhere. They're not going to run away. They're going to stay and fight forever. And they have no problem doing that. They'll fight. They'll send their kids out to fight. They'll send their grandkids out to fight. They'll send 10 generations from now out to fight. Remember, these are the folks that beat the Soviet Union when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan from 1979 to 1989. They're used to fighting for their whole lives, and they have no problem doing it. Maybe they enjoy it. I don't know. But they're not going anywhere. And you got to kind of start looking at the long term here. Unless you're going to kill every single one of them, which of course is impossible, then you're in this fight forever because they're in this fight forever. So number 1, they're winning, and they're going to be there forever. The number 2 reason why the Afghan Taliban will be given a legitimacy again is that the U.S. was never after the Afghan Taliban. Remember, after the September 11th attacks in 2001, the United States went to Afghanistan and they said, hey, we think al-Qaeda did this. In fact, we got good proof that al-Qaeda and Osama Bin Laden did these attacks. Those are the people we're trying to get. And we know they're in Afghanistan. So the United States went to the Afghan government, which is the Taliban, and said, look, dudes, we don't like you, all right, but we don't really have a big beef with you right this second. If you give us Bin Laden, if you give us al-Qaeda, if you let us come in and disrupt their activities, we'll leave you alone. We don't like you, but you can keep this stretch of mountainous crap in the middle of Central Asia. And the Taliban said, we don't think so. We're a sovereign state. We're in charge of this country. While we are not in complete agreement with al-Qaeda, they are extremist Islamicists just like us, and they're our brothers in arms, and we ain't turning them over to no Western power. And thus, the United States went in and wham, started beating the hell out of Afghanistan, driving the Taliban out of power, and also driving al-Qaeda and most Taliban leadership down to Pakistan. They were never after the Afghan Taliban, though. They were after al-Qaeda and Osama Bin Laden. And with the death of Osama Bin Laden right now, the U.S. can rightfully claim victory. And they're going to do it. The United States can say, hey, 10 years ago we came in to get Bin Laden and disrupt al-Qaeda activities. Mission accomplished. We got it. We got him, he's dead. And al-Qaeda activities are largely diminished, and they certainly are diminished in Afghanistan. So right now, the U.S. can look at Afghanistan and say, well, there ain't no al-Qaeda people there at all. So what the hell are we doing here? And that's a question which is getting asked a lot right this second. So you can claim victory. We got al-Qaeda. And now we can get the hell out of Dodge. And that's what's happening. And that leads me to number 3 reason why the Afghan Taliban is going to be re-legitimized. Everyone is over the Afghan war. I mean, everyone is over this war. Nobody wants to have anything to do with it anymore. The United States is sick of it. They may have been sick of it for a long time. All the NATO allies have been over it from the get-go. All the European states in NATO who are helping out with the Afghan campaign right now, overwhelming percentages of their populations are anti-war. They have been wanting their countries to get out of the Afghan campaign the entire time. And as every day passes, more people in Europe want this war to be over with. And it's not just Europeans, and it's not just most Americans, I think maybe. I don't know. I haven't seen a poll from America to see what public opinion is of the U.S. and Afghanistan still. But Pakistan is over this war. Pakistan is sick of this. Pakistan has a lot on their plate, and the Afghan war is not something that's making up a main course for them right now. They're done with it. Most of the neighbors around Afghanistan are sick of the chaos and the war that this war has created. So quite frankly, the world is over this war that everyone knows cannot be won. The Afghan Taliban ain't going nowhere, so how much longer are you going to perpetuate this mess? Everyone's over this war, and so everyone is increasingly saying, look, we hate the Afghan Taliban, but the only way that we can finish this war and settle this country out and get a legitimate government to stabilize this country is to get the Taliban back in here. So that's why I'm suggesting everyone being over this war is going to benefit the Afghan Taliban. The number 4 reason why the Afghan Taliban is going to be back in the game here is because the Pakistani ISI and the Pakistani military helped create and support the Afghan Taliban. They've never had a problem with the Afghan Taliban. What do I mean by that? The ISI is kind of like the CIA of Pakistan, although way more powerful in Pakistan. And the parts of the military and parts of the ISI in Pakistan were the ones that helped create the Afghan Taliban, helped fund them, helped arm them, helped train them, because they were created, again, in 1979 to 1989 to help fight the Soviets. U.S. money actually floated over here, floated into the Pakistani ISI and military coffers in order for them to funnel it up to help create this Taliban group, which would fight the Soviets. And now 3 decades later, the United States went in and said, oh, by the way, that group of people that we helped you, we paid you to help create, that are your allies and your buddies, go kill them now. The Pakistanis from the get-go have said, what? What? No, we don't have a problem with the Afghan Taliban. We created them. They're our buddies. The Afghan government and the military and the ISI kind of look upon the Afghan Taliban as a force of stability in this otherwise anarchic neighborhood. So they have never had a problem with the Afghan Taliban, ever. In fact, Pakistan was one of the few countries that actually recognized the Taliban as the legitimate rulers of sovereign state Afghanistan. I think they were the first. Them and Saudi Arabia, I think, were the only countries that actually recognized the Taliban. So Pakistan has never had an issue with this group, and I think they're actually, quite frankly, looking forward to getting them back in charge up there, because the Pakistanis can use them, again, as a tool of stability, but also Pakistan has secretly used them as a tool of instability to affect other events in other countries in their neighborhood, with places that they have problems with, namely India and maybe some other places I won't get into right here. So Pakistan never had a problem with the Afghan Taliban. And it would actually bring security and stability to this area. And that brings me to that Pakistan would really want this to happen because the Pakistani Taliban is now getting wildly out of control. And this is number 5. I think everyone's going to start recognizing the Afghan Taliban because they realize, oh, all that group wants is control of Afghanistan. This Pakistani Taliban group, though, they want to overthrow Pakistan and maybe blow up a lot more stuff in the world, and that is starting to be a much, much, much bigger issue than the control of the swath of Central Asian territory. So the Pakistani Taliban is now growing faster than the Afghan Taliban, has much bigger global aspirations, is getting much more dangerous, and Pakistan, quite frankly, does not have the time or the interest in fighting the Afghan Taliban anymore when they really need to focus on fighting the Pakistani Taliban. The Pakistani Taliban is an existential threat to the state of Pakistan. If you don't know what that fancy word means, existential means it's possibly going to make them not exist if they can't deal with this Pakistani Taliban issue. So a stable Afghanistan with the Afghan Taliban in charge, will establish order up there. And Pakistan doesn't have to worry about fighting them anymore and won't have to worry about the United States telling them to fight the Taliban. They can say, oh, no, come on. Everybody just recognize the Taliban, the Afghan Taliban, as legit. Let them stabilize that piece of property up there so we can get back to doing what we need to do, which is getting our country back in order. This, again, establishing the Taliban, while I think it would be horrific, I think it's a horrific group of people. I think their views on life, and especially women's rights and kids and how society should be run, are horrific. But in this neighborhood, Pakistan's saying, yes, they're terrible, but man, it's better than what we got. And it would be much better in our strategic interest to let them settle that mess out up there so that we can deal with the Pakistani Taliban, which is of much, much, much greater consequence to us. Dig this, folks. The Pakistani Taliban is now credited with way more attacks than al-Qaeda or the Afghan Taliban within Pakistan. They have had many, many, many attacks, and nasty ones, terrible ones. This is a full-on terrorist organization, in my opinion. I mean, you could look at the Afghan Taliban and say, oh, they're horrific. They're fighting against NATO and U.S. troops. And that's true. But listen to what you just said. The Afghan Taliban is shooting at people with guns who are shooting with guns back at them. It's almost a military-to-military fight. The Pakistani Taliban has no such qualms. They are blowing up schools, blowing up mosques, blowing up churches, blowing up markets. They're just killing civilians everywhere, and they have no problem doing it. Just this week, they killed over 90 people at a police recruitment station in northern Pakistan. Double suicide bomber. One bomber went in when people were getting on a bus to go home for vacation. These are young recruit police officers and military folks. Blew up the bus, and then a second one came in when all the emergency rescue folks came in and blew them up too. These are horrific, horrific people. On top of that, you probably forgot this little tidbit, but you remember when there was that failed bombing in Times Square, New York City, about a year or so ago? Do you remember that at all? There was like a Jeep Cherokee or something that had a bunch of explosives in it, but it failed to explode. I bet you can't even remember who was responsible for that. Hey, if you guessed Pakistani Taliban, give yourself a fortune cookie, because there's a lot going on with this group that now has perhaps global aspirations. And in fact, just 24 hours ago, 3 dudes in Florida were charged with collecting and donating money to the Pakistani Taliban. These guys are turning into an entity with much more global reach, much more global resources, perhaps, and much more aspirations to strike at targets outside of Pakistan, U.S. targets, maybe Western European targets, as well as, of course, targets in Pakistan. That is not the case with the Afghan Taliban. It is not. The Afghan Taliban does not have global aspirations or global reach. They have not conducted any terrorist attacks anywhere outside of Afghanistan, and they only want to regain control of their country. That's what separates them, and that, my friends, is, pulling it all together, the result. Because of all these things, there's going to be a willingness to accept the Afghan Taliban as a legitimate power broker, as a legitimate peace broker, as a part of a future viable government of Afghanistan, as a player in a democracy, or possibly that Afghanistan is going to be split and that the Afghan Taliban will be given their own little swath of territory to control as their own. I don't know which one, maybe neither, but that's where things are moving right now. And a lot of this is going to be accelerated because of the death of Osama Bin Laden and the U.S. being able to claim victory and perhaps start pulling troops out of there, which everybody's talking about right now. Everybody's talking about, ooh, we can move U.S. troops out now. How are you going to do it, though? If it's an unstable situation, get the Taliban in there as a viable partner to make it a stable situation. Woo! That's what's going on here. But don't underestimate the death potential that this Pakistani Taliban group has, and that's what everybody's going to start focusing on a lot more. Hamid Karzai, the president of Afghanistan, has actually, for years now, suggested that they need to invite the Taliban to the negotiating table. The U.S. has now been hinting about it behind closed doors and putting the word out to perhaps top Taliban leadership, Afghan Taliban leadership, that perhaps they should talk to them and, would you be open and receptive to perhaps coming to the table? They're not going to talk about it in public, but they're talking about it behind closed doors. And my main man from India, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh of India, was in Afghanistan earlier this week. And while he was there, he was donating millions of dollars for Afghan relief and probably setting up some business connections. And while he was giving a speech, he outright said, I think the Taliban should be invited to the negotiating table to perhaps have their own little state or perhaps be part of the government. But this place needs to be stabilized, and it's not going to be stabilized without the Afghan Taliban as part of the process. That's what I've gotten so excited about. That is the real big deal about what Osama Bin Laden's death is going to affect. It's this stuff. It's not really al-Qaeda. They're kind of a franchise like McDonald's doing their own thing now. Bin Laden's death's not going to affect them that much. It's really going to affect the Afghan Taliban and the whole Afghan campaign. Now let me ask you, the viewers, what is your opinion of the Afghan Taliban being legitimized? Does that bother you? Think you should do it? Think the United States should stay and fight indefinitely? What would be another solution you would suggest? In addition, leave me some comments about how the U.S.-Pakistani relationship should proceed at this point. It's at an all-time low right now. How should the United States proceed with Pakistan? Have it continue as a viable partner, even though a lot of Pakistanis hate the United States, and you have this Pakistani Taliban who's targeting the United States along with the Pakistani government? How can the United States proceed given the bad blood that exists now between the U.S. and Pakistan since the U.S. just caught and killed Osama Bin Laden in Pakistani territory, which is what the United States has been saying for a decade that they're there, and Pakistan has been denying it. This is an all-time low in the relationship. How should it proceed? And how do you think the Pakistani Taliban should be dealt with, and what should the U.S. role be? And I'd specifically like to hear from my Pakistani friends on this issue, if you care to venture out a comment or two. But for now, we're out.